Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
It is My Nerd World, Depeche Mode, the podcast. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. I hope we're having a fantastic week. I got a 3-day weekend coming up. I'm excited about that. Driving home today, listening to the Rewatchables podcast. If you're not familiar with the Rewatchables podcast, and this is Depeche Mode related adjacent. If you're not familiar with this podcast, Bill Simmons, he's a sports writer, rather well known within the sports world. I knew who Bill Simmons was prior to discovering the Rewatchables podcast, but I couldn't have picked his voice out if I had heard it. I'm a fan of his now because of this podcast. He has a podcast network called the Ringer Network. Rewatchables is just what the title would imply. It's a podcast where they talk about movies that are rewatchable. If you're into movies, find this podcast. It is one of the best movie podcasts that I have, if not the best movie podcast that I have ever heard. The way that they break down films and the group of individuals that host with Bill Simmons on the podcast are absolutely fantastic. They repost on occasion older podcasts, and I must have missed this one unless I forgot that I listened to it. Sometimes they put up some podcasts that are exclusive on Spotify. But anyway, the one that they were doing was Say Anything. Say Anything falls into that category of Depeche Mode adjacent. Of course, the live version of Stripped from 101 appeared on the soundtrack. And at the time, going back to, it came out in 1989, which is also relevant for what I'm about to talk about. The movie did. For the time when it came out, being a Depeche Mode fan, whenever Depeche Mode landed on something outside of an official release, on a soundtrack, in a movie, right? A TV show. It still is a big deal, but it was a really big deal back then. So to have my beloved Depeche, our beloved Depeche, land on a soundtrack and being able to hear the song played in the movie was awesome. And it's one of those films. One just reminds me of that 16-year-old time in my life when I was falling in love with this band and falling in love with girls as well. How important that film was at that moment in time, but also its connection to Depeche Mode. So I put it in that Depeche Mode adjacent category. It reminded me too, though, because this week is the anniversary of the release of Personal Jesus, going back to 1989, prior to the release of Violator in 1990. And again, my mind just starts spinning, and I talked about this on a recent episode, but that time period where we were getting a lot of Depeche Mode content year after year. When you're younger, time moves slower. A year seems like a long time. But, we had the concert. We had, going back to the release of course, Music for the Masses, 87. You have the famous 101 concert at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena in 88. Following that, next year, we get the release of Personal Jesus. And the fact that the band was reinventing itself, I use that term loosely. It wasn't a complete reinvention, right? But they were putting out music that was, very different from what they had released prior. Certainly when you go from Music for the Masses into Violator and, of course, Songs of Faith and Devotion over a very short timeline, it really, really is an incredible moment in time for the band that we all love. I want to take this moment as well to mention, speaking of podcasts, be sure to go and check out the Forever 80s podcast on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. The most recent, and I believe this is a newer podcast, but the most recent episode of the Forever 80s podcast features Rob Rome of the Depeche Mode Global Fan Group. I had the privilege of being on one of their drinkin' chats. If you've been listening to the show for any length of time, we discussed quite a bit the bizarrish history of running in the same friend circles but never being able to figure out exactly what the direct connection was that I have with Rob Rome. But I like to think that we have become friends again through our fandom, and more so than we were back during that time period I was just speaking of. But it really is a fantastic interview, and I'm jealous of Rob's vast knowledge of Depeche Mode. I got to get him on the show. It's always difficult for me because the times at which I record and trying to get somebody scheduled, I'm always like, I want to schedule it, but I'm going to have time. I need to make that happen, though, because I want to spend an hour or so with Rob just picking his brain especially after being on one of his shows during the Drink and Chat. And the link is still available in the notes for each of the episodes if you want to go and check that out, as are links to some of the mixes that I've found and the documentaries that I've mentioned on the show as well. You can find those links in the notes, whether you're on YouTube or whatever podcast platform that you happen to be listening to the show on. Now, there's not a lot going on. I got a little bit of news here I want to share. The band is still on vacation, doing that thing with my fingers. We're all waiting for September 21st for them to return on the next leg here in North America in Mexico City. As I mentioned on a previous episode as well, this is where we've been told Peter Gordino has said that in Mexico, and there's a couple of shows in Mexico, as a matter of fact. I'm looking at it right here. They have a show on the 21st and the 23rd. So if they are shooting as Peter... Actually, there's 3 shows. 21st, 23rd, and 25th. With 3 shows taking place in Mexico, if they are shooting for the live Blu-ray release, then they've got 3 shows that Anton Corbijn will be able to pull from. So there's not a lot going on in terms of news from the band. I will say that I am stretching out my contacts in an attempt. I wasn't going to say anything on the show, but I'll go ahead and say it. I'm trying to get an interview with the band, so I'm going to see what shakes out. So I'm not even optimistic. I'm just making the effort to try to get either Martin or Dave, a few minutes with Martin or Dave on the phone to do an interview in this time that they have off. So we'll see how that shakes out. So say a little prayer that would end up happening. One news item this week, it was announced that Sony is continuing, no surprise here, their Depeche Mode 12-inch singles box sets with a package for the band's 2013 album, Delta Machine. The 12-inch singles will contain 6 records featuring remixes of 3 singles, Heaven, Soothe My Soul, and Should Be Higher. 3 of these are replicas of the original releases, while 3 are newly compiled with remixes, dub mixes, instrumental versions, live sessions, and radio mixes of the singles, as well as the bonus track of Goodbye, the Gessa Feffelstein remix. The box set comes in the usual packaging with the poster. Delta Machine, the 12-inch singles, will be released on October 6th of this year. You know, Delta Machine's an interesting one to me. It's not an album that really, really sticks out. I think it's better than Spirit, even though at the time of the release of Spirit, I didn't have that opinion. But going back and listening to Delta Machine, I put it a little bit above Spirit, but it's not high on my list of favorite Depeche Mode albums. After listening to the demos, and we've talked about this before on the show, but listening to the demos for Delta Machine, it's interesting the direction they took for the album, given the quality of the demos and how much more electronic-based they were. Delta Machine seems like a release and a time period that should have been a lot bigger for the band than it was. Like, I feel like the band really expected that Delta Machine was going to be as well received as Memento Mori was. And it was a good album, but certainly, again, not as well received as Memento Mori. And going into Spirit, it would appear as if the expectations were lowered, a little bit more. And again, this is just a surface-level observation opinion based off of thinking of those time periods, the release packages around the album itself, and the way that Delta Machine was presented. It really felt like it should have been, the band thought it was going to be a much bigger hit, which is interesting because if you go back and look at the releases before that in terms of what we got extra of documentaries and box sets and all that, it really was kind of going down and going down. Now, the industry was certainly changing. Streaming was becoming more, has been becoming more prominent. We're going back to 2013 here, so it was 10 years ago now. Streaming was there, but still not as prominent. We were getting some more physical releases at the time, but fewer and fewer. So it may just be a byproduct of the changing consumer market. I still feel as if, though, the band was certainly not expecting, based off the performance of Spirit and Delta Machine, that Memento Mori was going to be as well received as it's been. And that's why I'm hoping that those rumors that I've been hearing of a potential box set or something special being released within the next few months before the end of the year comes true, now that they know that they've got a hit, relatively speaking, on their hands with Memento Mori, and just how popular it's been and how well received the album has been. As always, any thoughts that you have, I love hearing from you. We're going to get to your listener feedback now. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be listening on YouTube, leave a comment on YouTube as well. I always love hearing from you. And speaking of your listener feedback, as promised from last week, I held on to one listener, Danielle Manette, and her email from last week talking about remixes. And I'll recap a bit of what she wrote, and I'll go through her list, and we'll dive into the rest of the listener feedback this week. Since the last time I wrote, I've been revisiting and discovering remixes. I thought it could be a good subject for the show since the band is in hiatus and news will be slow. I agree with you that any remix produced after Violator are not in the same category as the ones before, and they tend to be more techno dance in genre. Not that there isn't some real gems in the newer stuff, but the older remixes had a different feel to them. I've created two separate remix playlists, 81 to 91 and 93 to 23. I'm curious to know what your favorites are in these two categories. Here are mine. So, 81 to 91, and this is a pretty solid list. Shout the Rio mix. She writes, Love in Itself .4. I'm not 100% sure what that remix particularly is. Master and Servant, the Slavery Whip mix, Flexible Extended mix, Fly on the Windscreen, Death mix, Shake the Disease, Edit the Shake. 100% all day long. Yes, that is almost at the top of my list of remixes. You want to know how to do a good remix? You do the Shake the Disease, Edit the Shake. Keeps the original song intact while extending it. Absolutely fantastic. Question of Lust, minimal version. I like that version. I don't care for the end of that one. Strip, the Highland mix. Yep. A Strange Love, Pain mix version. All the Route 66 Behind the Wheel remixes. Enjoy the Silence, Hands and Feet mix. Solid. I would say this, though. I would change the Enjoy the Silence, Hands and Feet mix for one of my all-time favorite Depeche Mode mixes, and that is the Enjoy the Silence, the Quad Final mix. Now, the Quad Final mix is tough because you need 15 minutes to listen to the whole thing. But what that mix does is truly astonishing to me. It's like you're going on a journey. As a matter of fact, I think it's one of the samples within the mix itself. You have the original version almost intact, right? There's changes to the mix itself, but the lyrics are all there intact. And then you just go through this, you ride this wave of different mixes leading to the orchestral portion at the end of the Quad Final mix, which is arguably one of my favorite pieces of non-official album material. That orchestra, that orchestral version of Enjoy the Silence at the end of the Quad Final mix is just absolutely fantastic. Getting to her 93 to 23, to 2023 mix. In Your Room, Extended Zephyr mix. Wrong, the Trent Mueller mix, club mix. Okay. Useless, a Kruder and Dorfmeister session. Fragile Tension, Peter Bjorn and Jean remix. You know what? And that's not a song that I care for very much, but that remix is pretty solid. It's funny, though, because immediately now, and this isn't anything on on Danielle here, but the quality of the remixes goes down when you go 93 to 2023. Some of these are good, but they're nowhere on par with what she had listed before. A Ghost Le Weekend remix. Yeah, and I love the song Ghost, too. That's one that I kind of wish had ended up on the album. Nothing, Head Cleaner Rock Mix, solid. And Puppets, the Roy's mix remix. I'm saying that completely wrong. One of my favorites as well. I love, that's the one that sounds of Puppets. That's the one that sounds a bit like New Order. Absolutely fantastic. I'm with you 100% on that one. So thank you for that. One of the other remixes, I didn't put together a list for the show this week. I may do it for next week. But one of the other remixes that I really enjoyed from sort of the second half of their career was the I Feel Loved remix done by one of the guys from Nights Are Ebb. I thought that remix was really good. It was basically like the single version, but it was beefed up. I almost wished it was a single version. Reminds me quite a bit of what they did with the Zephyr mix. I mean, obviously they took a slower song and they added a more rock and rock edge to it with a slightly faster beat. But that I think it was the Bon Harris remix of I Feel Loved. I actually prefer that over the original version, mostly because it sounds like the original version. It's got a beefiness, for lack of a better term, quality to it that I enjoy. All right, getting to more of your listener feedback this week. Petzitsky writes, when I hear pipeline, I don't think about the Berlin subway making the sound. I get instead transported every time when I listen to the cover of Construction Time Again to the inside of that big mountain where there are huge mines, and the guy on the cover with the sledgehammer is there among other guys like him, and the machine sound at the end is the mine carts rolling towards the blast furnace. I dig it. That's pretty cool. I've actually thought about that as well. I've had moments listening to that song where I have been as equally reminded of the cover of that album. By the way, speaking of Construction Time Again, I made a huge error last week and somehow got my wires crossed during the podcast and alluded to, or maybe even have said outright, that People Are People was on Construction Time Again. I had one person call me out on it. I'm surprised more people didn't. I think I said it in passing, and I certainly didn't mean to, and I felt like that's a major faux pas in my book when you go put a song on a wrong album. So my bad. All right, let's get to more of your listener feedback. This comes from Jon. Thank you, Jon, for the listener feedback. It's great to have someone like you to keep us DM fans warm. I think it was your enthusiasm that made me curate my DM playlists better. You might remember my playlist of cover songs. Yes, I do, that I shared with you a few months ago. For me, songs in a good playlist cannot be put in randomly. I'm not able to define it musically, but the next song has to click right. Just has to click right with the previous one. So, little bit of relatability to this. I agree with you 100%. I go riding on my bike like almost every single day, weather permitting here in Minnesota. And I make playlists, and I have playlists that I use when I go riding. And what I'll do is, and I probably told the story before, but I'll actually go in and I'll curate those playlists for every ride. And I do exactly the same thing. I go and make sure that the songs flow well one into another. There's another thing that I do, and just a quick side story apart from Depeche Mode. I have a massive physical media collection. I have a ton of CDs, but most of those are in storage. Just because there's no place to display them, and almost everything that I have on disc I've now got in some way, shape, or form on streaming. But I do have a huge collection of mostly all Blu-rays, some DVDs if they haven't released them in Blu-ray yet. I don't have them in alphabetical order. I have them like in genre and actor order. Now, it's funny because it's a running joke in my house. Whenever anybody in the family is looking for a particular movie, I can point to where in my room/office on my movie shelf. I can tell them where on the movie shelf it is, what shelf it's on, and where in the order it is, just because I know it that well. So much along the same lines of curating playlists, I've curated my movie collection. I think it was Dave who recently mentioned, Jan goes on to say, how carefully they chose the correct order of the songs on their albums. I can imagine that this is also the reason why they have more or less a fixed playlist on tour. They want to give us a perfect listening experience. Even though I can understand this logic, and with such a large catalog, it's obviously a terribly difficult task, and only works well with songs you really like. For my taste, there are too many singles included on this tour that nag me a bit. I would throw out at least one-third of the songs and replace them with some that might work better in a big crowd, or make the tour unique. Hey, where is the sun and the rainfall? Yeah, I really wish that they had never mentioned the possibility of including that on this tour. For example, I don't understand why they don't play But Not Tonight again. Now in regular form, it's one of the rare DM songs where you can get that full house singing vibe. Let's face it, not all concert visitors are diehard fans, not all know the lyrics, but a poppy ooh from But Not Tonight can get everyone singing along. I remember the Sounds of the Universe tour where they wanted the audience to sing along to Peace. The Peace Will Come to Me part. The guys have completely missed out on how difficult this part is to sing. I like to sing along. I really wanted to sing along, but I couldn't. This part is too high for my voice. Yes, I was going to go off on a tangent, but I will just really quick. Speaking of Delta Machine, before I forget, I'm curious to know if anybody else has a problem with this. I want so desperately to love that song. Should Be Higher from Delta Machine. Ever since I heard it. Because I think it's a fantastic song, and the music is great, and the lyrics are great. But when Dave hits that high note, it takes me out every single time. Love is all I want. I can't get past that. I've toyed with the idea of trying to make some sort of remix and take that out of it, because the rest of the song is fantastic. Am I the only one? The high-pitched singing in Should Be Higher, it ruins that song for me every single time. All right. Jan says, now back to the remixes, which is good because I need to get back to the remixes. You mentioned that you like the extended versions of songs. I prefer it when the remixer changes the character of a song or finds a tweak that works well with the logic of the song. On top of all, the remixes for me are the two by Alison Goldfrapp. Yes, she did a tremendous job that the band themselves appreciate. Another guest remixer was, of course, Alan Wilder, often with Gareth Jones, who I think we have to thank for so many altered versions of on his albums. The last one to be mentioned is Ulrich Shanas' remix of Little 15. To be honest, I don't like this song, but the remixer has updated the vibe of the song so much that I love it. And the outro is pure magic. I'm going to have to revisit that one. You can compare that to the golden ones of The Landscape is Changing or Cover Me. That's it from me for now, or almost. Here's my top 10 in alphabetical order. Alone, Always You, Blue Dress, But Not Tonight, Halo, the Goldfrapp mix, I Want You Now, Alan Wilder, Exotic Tour remix, Sweet as Perfection, The Landscape is Changing, The Sun and the Rainfall, and Waiting for the Night. Interesting. I wish you a good day. Jan, pronounced Jan, and I hope I'm getting that right. Cheers. Thank you very much. I also want to, I didn't get his permission, but I'm going to read it anyways. A friend of the show, Matt, who I'll be seeing the band with coming up in November, his vote for number one remix was the Heaven, the Owlie remix, Owlle, if I'm pronouncing that right. Better than the original, and I tend to agree. I love this mix so much. Takes the song from being meh, or actually no thank you, to an absolute must listen. Not sure I can say that for any other DM remix versus the original. And he also shared Personal Jesus, the Stargate mix. Another one in the category of better than the original, in this case because it's played out. But I love this mix. Totally brought this song back to life for me. They got rid of the bluesy twang and the Personal Jesus Stargate mix. Yeah, and I'm glad that that Matt, and thank you, Matt, as always. I'm glad that he shared those with me, because both of those remixes of the Oli remix and the Stargate mix, very different from the originals, but both absolutely fantastic. All right, we got one more listener feedback. Comes from you're all friends of the show. Friend of the show, Jason. I hope you and the Nerd World community are doing well. I've been watching a lot of fan footage of the current tour. The footage from the Estonia show is some of the best. A couple of things I've noticed from all the footage I've watched since the start of the tour. Compared to the footage I've watched of the North American warm-up shows, when the tour hit Europe, the lighting appears much more prominent and pronounced compared to the earlier shows, or is that just my imagination? And how Peter and Dave carefully watch, often with amusement, Martin each night as he plays the opening riff of Everything Counts. I noticed Dave counting the number of repeats for Martin on the last tour. Seeing it always makes me chuckle. Following up on your piece on the devotional tour, the band did mention in the past about Anton's naivete with the stage design and how it was a logistical and costly affair as they were in essence building a stage on top of another stage. And on the subject of the devotional tour, there's a fantastic, insightful video by Von George interviewing Steve Lyon. Yep, I've watched it. On the amount of work and difficulties he and Alan had putting together the music for the tour and the lawsuit with Roland. Well worth a watch, I agree. Off the top of my head, some of my favorite remixes are Shep Pettibone's Behind the Wheel, also one of my favorite sleeves. Oli's Heaven, which I just mentioned. Also, the Trent Mueller remix of Wrong, also mentioned. And, of course, Alan's rework of In Chains and Vince's Behind the Wheel. What I found odd is, over all the years, no one has ever gone back and had a crack at Just Can't Get Enough, which has always seemed to be a prime candidate for a club remix. On a lighter note, has anyone tried playing the Hold to Feed video with a wagging tongue playing over it? Oh, that's interesting. Probably the one and only way you're going to get me to go watch the Hold to Feed video, but that could be rather interesting. Regards, Jason. Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate it. I may have to check that out this weekend, since I'm on a long weekend, after I've enjoyed myself some rum. That sounds like a fantastic idea. Thank you so much for checking out the episode this week. I'll be back again next week. Before I let you go, just a reminder that if you happen to read and you like science fiction and you want to support my Nerd World Depeche Mode, the podcast, I hope you will check out my science fiction adventure series set in a future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture. It is inspired in part by Depeche Mode, life in the so-called space age, the world that we live in, and life in general. Depeche Mode plays a large part with the underlying themes of the story, and the main character himself is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time when the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story. They feature references, both direct and indirect, to Depeche Mode while telling an exciting science fiction adventure saga. Book 1 is described as follows. Keitha's father died 1 year ago. Yesterday, he gave her the key to saving humanity. She just doesn't know it yet. The stars are within reach. Rival megacorporations D-Corp and Enercon have made interstellar travel possible and spaceflight available to the masses. But when an industrial accident inside D-Corp sets off a catastrophic chain of events, all of Earth is at risk. Meanwhile, when Keitha Morrow suddenly receives a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, fellow pilot Taft Guardia eagerly agrees to help her investigate. As the global evacuation begins, the ruthless Sin Argum of D-Corp attempts to exploit the disaster and gain control, while Taft and Keitha discover what may be the only chance of stopping D-Corp's evil leader before it's too late. If you like your science fiction to be epic, filled with some romance and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Written for adults, but great for ages 11 years old and older. You can pick up EMBARK Book 1 in ebook for only 99 cents. The box set of EMBARK, all 7 books in the series available in ebook at a discounted price as well. You can also not only get them in ebook, but hardcover, audiobook, and paperback, which you can buy directly from me, and I'll even autograph them. I usually get them out and to you in less than a week. So email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, if you have any interest in picking up a paperback version of any of the 7 books in the series. If you want to go online and purchase them directly, Amazon.com, look for EMBARK, Jon, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. But take advantage of buying them direct. You can get the paperbacks for slightly less than what you buy for them on Amazon, and the shipping is dramatically cheaper. And again, I'll autograph them to whoever you want to autograph them to, you or somebody else, at no extra charge. All right, my dog is staring at me from the stairs above and whining. I think that means it's time for me to go. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. I'm back again next week, and I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you are safe. I'll talk to you then. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin